Okay. Hello, bonjour, guten tag. This is Paul Rosen, the executive chairman of Global Go, welcoming everyone back again today. We're doing something really quite unprecedented at Global Go. We are focusing on Switzerland for 2 consecutive weeks. We had a phenomenal webinar just recently regarding some of the incredible things that are happening in the Swiss cannabis industry. We highlighted at our last webinar this incredible trial project that's going to allow adult use recreational cannabis in certain targeted municipalities in Switzerland starting on or about May 15th, which is really exciting. But we're here today to talk about the medicalization and the ability for patients in need to get cannabis-based therapies from their health authority or their doctor. And there's been a lot of progression alongside how medical cannabis is going to be prescribed. You're going to hear all about it today from some true experts. Before we get started, it is incumbent upon me to first of all wish everyone a very happy 420 day. For anyone that is even remotely familiar with our industry, 420 is sort of the national holiday of the cannabis industry. And it is a day, historically, it's been a day to sort of just have fun, if you will, imbibe the plant, hang out, sit at a park. But it's really taken on increased momentum and I will say importance as the world is working towards cannabis reform. And within 420 is a lot more than just, going out and getting to enjoy cannabis. It has to do with the development of our industry, and it has a lot to do with social justice and social equity, which are topics that are near and dear to our industry. So I want to wish everybody a very happy 420. Just to give a little bit of an overview, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to have an incredible speaker in a moment named Francesca Quadri, who's the president of MedCan. MedCan is actually a preferred charity for all of you who are attending today and enjoying today's incredible content. We're asking you to make a $200 or any amount that you can afford donation to MedCan, which is Switzerland's Medical Cannabis Association. And in just a few moments, we're going to hear from the president of MedCan. And I think you'll agree with me that this is an incredibly important initiative to support. Global Go never charges for its webinars, but we do encourage all of our attendees to try to support causes that are near and dear to the development of the industry. And MedCan is today's choice. We're going to learn a lot about what it's like to be a patient in Switzerland right now, and we're going to find out about some meaningful additional reform that's going to make it easier for patients to get access to medical cannabis by going through a physician instead of what was previously the case through a government official. So we're going to followed by Francesca. We're going to hear from a keynote, Daniel Heyman, and then we're going to go to our panel. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce today's august guest speaker, Ms. Francesca Quadri, the president of MedCan. Francesca is a patient advocate. In 2009, she was paralyzed from the neck down as a consequence of a paragliding accident. And as a consequence, she suffers from chronic pain and severe spasticity. And due to many side effects of taking traditional painkillers from the pharmaceutical industry, Francesca has stopped almost all medication and treats herself with cannabis, which is an incredible thing for Francesca and a proof of the efficacy of the plant. We're going to hear about Francesca's journey, her challenges to get recognition as a patient and to be able to treat her condition, her pain with her preferred medication of choice, not a pharmaceutical product, but a plant-based product. Without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Francesca Quadri.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm happy to be here to represent the patients. Can I see my presentation?
Francesca, I think maybe you just have to share screen. There we go.
Oh, okay. Can you flip the page to the next slide? I don't want to talk much about myself. I'm an example of the 100,000 patients in Switzerland as estimated by the Federal Office of Public Health. In 2009, I broke my neck in a paragliding accident. Since then, I have been 100% dependent on help. I always say that the wheelchair is the least of my problems. Unfortunately, I have strong neuropathic pains and heavy spasticity that makes my life hell, and it's the reason why I take cannabis as a medicine. Can you flip again? As I said, I am one of many sick people in Switzerland who rely on cannabis. Only a few thousand have a special permit from the Federal Office of Public Health. The rest, like me, have to supply themselves illegally. This is why MedCan was founded in 2014 to draw attention to the difficult situation of patients. Can you flip again? Our members are of all ages and come from all walks of life. Some members have a special permit and a treating doctor. Most of them treat themselves illegally. I also immediately tried to get a special permit in 2012 when it became possible. With my diagnosis of chronic pain and spasticity, this was not a problem. With the cannabis tincture, which fortunately my health insurance paid for, I started to reduce my other medications. Today I only take one pharmaceutical drug. I have replaced the rest of my medication with cannabis. I feel much better today. As I replaced more and more pharmaceuticals with the cannabis tincture, the health insurance cost increased. Above 1,500 Swiss francs per month, they were not longer willing to pay. Unfortunately, the products are so expensive that, can you flip the chart? Okay. Once they are, unfortunately, simply to understand, Sativex, a gram of THC costs 1,700 Swiss francs. On the black market, you pay less than 100 Swiss francs for 1 gram of THC. So if I would buy the legal products, it would cost me over 20,000 Swiss francs per month. This is why I have no choice but go back to the illegal way. I also speak in behalf of many patients with the same experience. Here you can see what is allowed in Switzerland. I have listed it for you on this slide. The product that can be received with a special permit are very limited. For many patients, the products are too expensive if the health insurance does not pay for them. I personally need a high dose of cannabis medication, extract with a high level of THC, and I also need cannabis flower to smoke and vaporize. These products are not allowed in Switzerland. Cannabis flowers are still prohibited in Switzerland. It is important for me to say that at the moment in Switzerland a meaningful cannabis therapy is not possible with these products. Patients need and want different cannabis strains and different forms of intake. This development can also be seen in countries like Israel, Germany, Canada, or in some US states. Also, the price of the medication in the future is very important. The health insurance companies will probably only pay once the first scientific data have been collected to show the effectiveness. That is why the medication must remain affordable. Otherwise, patients will be forced back onto the black market if they cannot afford the legal products. Can you flip again? And last but not least, I would like to say something about the work of the association. It is very difficult for the patients to get the information. That's why we have a website and we communicate a lot through social media. We organize meetings so that patients can share their experience. and new patients can get the right information. Every month we have several new patients. Unfortunately, we cannot tell much to them because there are not a lot of possibilities. At the moment, these meetings only take place online. Medcan Association is currently the only place in Switzerland where you can get information about the medical use of cannabis. There are some other associations in the French part of Switzerland as well. That's why we are also campaigning on a political level for something to finally change. It is also important to us that opinions of cannabis is changing in society. We try to publish a patient story every month to break down the stigma. And this year we are also allowed to contribute to medical education. We are very happy to be able to share the experience of patients. These experiences are very important for doctors to prescribe cannabis properly in the future. Can you flip again? I would like to thank you for allowing me to show the patient's point of view. If you wish, you can support our work with a membership or a donation. The patients are happy about the new law, but there are still many questions that need to be clarified. The new law is almost like the law in Germany, but the patients still have many problems. They can't find a doctor and the health insurance companies often don't pay. Fortunately, there is now greater variety of cannabis medication and the prices have fallen. Switzerland should avoid all these mistakes from the beginning. I will end with these words and look forward to discuss afterwards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Francesca. That was inspiring and illuminating. While we all are excited about the commercial potential of this industry, let's just sort of get back to fundamentals. Before we worry about the entrepreneurs and the capitalists and the ability to make money, which is all exciting and part of the development of an industry, let's circle back to where this industry was birthed from. The beginning of the reform in global cannabis starts with the patients. In Canada, it started with a class of patients that sought constitutional recognition to obtain medical cannabis with their doctor's support, something that should be self-evident. It was actually protected by our constitution. And it's taken patient advocates like Francesca to move the needle from where it was decades ago, which was complete skepticism and honestly a real diminishment of the efficacy of cannabis as a therapy, to where we are today, where someone like Francesca is a living, breathing example of what a profound impact in a positive sense cannabis has had in her life. So if that moved you, and it certainly moved me, the best way to recognize that is to support Medcan, because Medcan is going to continue to make it easier for patients to be able to find an affordable course of therapy. Francesca, thanks so much for your leadership, for your bravery, and for your advocacy on behalf of patients in this industry. I'm now excited to introduce our keynote, Mr. Daniel Heyman, attorney at law. Daniel, I'm about to mispronounce the name of your law firm, Froria. Daniel is an attorney with one of the leading Swiss law firms. His main area of practice is corporate and commercial law, with a focus on private equity and venture capital transactions, as well as on regulatory matters. What's relevant to today is Daniel established the first dedicated legal cannabis practice in Switzerland and advises investors, startups, and vertically integrated companies in the emerging cannabis industry all along the value chain. Daniel, excited to hear about your point of view. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. There's a lot to cover, so I'll dive right in. A study conducted by the Institute for Addiction and Health Research on behalf of the Federal Office of Public Health. The findings, by the way, were published in February 2020. Came to the conclusion that for over 96% of participants questioned, the consumption of medical cannabis has led to an improvement of their symptoms, as we heard from Francesca. Half of the participants reported an extreme improvement. The main reason for cannabis consumption today is pain and stress management. A large part of the participants who already had prescriptions for cannabinoid-based medicines even reported that they were able to either completely abandon other prescribed drugs, or at least they were able to strongly reduce their consumption. So today in Switzerland, around 3,000 patients are legally prescribed medicinal cannabis. Meanwhile, and as we heard before, the Federal Office of Public Health estimates that over 110,000 patients are consuming cannabis illegally. Perhaps the current revision or reform will bring about the long-awaited change. So with regard to the status quo, cannabis is considered a prohibited narcotic in Switzerland today. Under certain very restrictive circumstances, cannabis with the THC content above 1% may be prescribed for medicinal purposes, and that requires an exceptional permit from the Federal Office of Public Health. As the currently most researched cannabinoid, THC is predominantly used for chronic pain conditions, spasticity and spasms, as well as nausea and loss of appetite, and this very often in the context of chemotherapy. Now, ready-to-use medicinal products may only be marketed in Switzerland if they're approved by Swissmedic. This is the Swiss Agency for Therapeutic Products. And there's only one product that is fully approved today, which is Sativex, which was mentioned earlier. This can be prescribed without special permit for spastic convulsions in multiple sclerosis only. In case of another indication, in case of off-label use, you still have to require or obtain a special exception permit from the Federal Office of Public Health. If an approved preparation is still unsuitable, the physicians can prescribe cannabis as a drug which is exempt from approval by Swissmedic, but it still requires a special permit by the Federal Office of Public Health. The drug is then usually produced by a pharmacy on the prescription of a doctor. It's a so-called extemporaneous preparation, in German eine Magistralrezeptur, which really is how cannabis today in Switzerland is mostly prescribed. It cannot be stressed enough at this point that treatment with medicinal cannabis is in general not covered by health insurance. The reason that is given for this is unclear scientific evidence regarding the efficiency, the cost effectiveness of medicinal cannabis products, especially in the context of these extemporaneous preparations. In exceptional cases, medicinal cannabis is reimbursed. However, this is in the discretion of the individual health insurance. The treatment with medicinal cannabis costs on average, as we heard before, it can range from 500 Swiss francs per month to potentially tens of thousands of Swiss francs per month. And this is, as we heard, a luxury that most patients simply can't afford. And on top of that, the application for a special permit at the Federal Office of Public Health is quite burdensome, both for the physician and the patient. Although most applications are granted, the surge of applications in the last years no longer justifies the special treatment of cannabis as a prohibited narcotic. Now, the current revision of the Narcotics Act should, by conservative estimates, be implemented in the fall of 2022 only. The authorities are currently in the process of evaluating and drafting the ordinance which governs more detailed levels on how to implement the most important changes. Now, these are: the ban on marketability of medical cannabis will be lifted in the Narcotics Act, which means that medical cannabis is reclassified a controlled narcotic with restricted marketability. So cultivation, processing, production, trade will be subject to the authorization and control system of Swissmedic. This is the same as in case of other narcotics that are used in the medical context, for example, morphine. A special permit by the Federal Office of Public Health, as you mentioned earlier, Paul, will no longer be required to prescribe medicinal cannabis. In other words, every doctor in Switzerland will be able to prescribe medicinal cannabis. It will be imperative in that context that every doctor receive the required training, education, and also the incentives to actually support this reform. During the first few years after coming into force of the amendment, the doctors will have to regularly report a whole range of data regarding the therapies to the Federal Office of Public Health. The data collection will serve as a basis for additional scientific evaluation of the revision. Now, another very important factor of the reform will be that commercial exports of medicinal cannabis will be made possible. And now maybe it's a good point to switch to where I personally see some commercial opportunities for players in this market. It starts with the cultivation of medicinal cannabis, still with a special permit, of course, by the Federal Office of Public Health. In the future, this will switch to Swissmedic. Further research into new plant varieties and traits, as well as cannabinoid development, as we heard last week. Innovative research and development of cannabinoid-based drugs, the development of innovative delivery methods, medtech products and other products such as sophisticated vapes, asthma sprays, for example, like a product that is very popular in Israel called Psych, slow release tablets and other innovations. I believe that the medicinal cannabis trade will start to flourish, imports and exports. There is room for cannabis tech companies, software companies that support the seed to sale solution, for example, with traceability features. Education platforms will be important, especially for physicians, and these could be provided by entrepreneurs with experience in jurisdictions where medicinal cannabis has been more widely established. We heard earlier in Israel, Canada, Germany, even in the UK. So circling back to my preliminary remarks on the poll, it's very clear that a review of scientific evidence on the efficacy of cannabinoid-based drugs is really warranted here. However, and this is my view, it's very imperative that other societal, political, economic, and in particular ethical considerations also play into the decision on whether medicinal cannabis should be reimbursed by health insurers. Health insurance coverage is really what is going to determine whether the current reform is going to be successful. And one of the key aspects of success is obviously affordable access to medicinal cannabis with a fully transparent, quality controlled supply chain. If that does not happen, this reform will fail. It will fail to drive well over 100,000 patients into the legal market. And it will ultimately also fail to stop their current stigmatization. So that concludes my note, and I'm very much looking forward to answer additional questions. And back to you, Paul.
Daniel, thank you so much. That was incredibly illuminating. This is our third webinar on Switzerland, so that really tells you that there is something incredibly dynamic and I think momentous happening in Switzerland. So it's going to take a nation or a village to raise this child, if you will. Daniel, thank you so much for your insights and for your continued advocacy on behalf of the industry. Let's get to our panel. Reminder, it's 420, so everyone smile, be happy. It's a great day to be in the cannabis industry. Our moderator is familiar to anyone that's paying even remote attention to the cannabis industry, my friend and my esteemed colleague, Alfredo Pascual, now Happy, the Vice President and Investment Analyst of Fast Forward Innovations Limited, a fund pursuing investment opportunities in European cannabis and likely abroad. Alfredo has a tremendous passion and commitment to the plant and to the development of the industry. He's one of the most recognized thought leaders and opinionators that I've come across. It's been my pleasure to sit on panels with him and to really learn from him as he continues to lead sort of the thought leadership in our industry. Alfredo, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for this very kind introduction. And yeah, very happy about the panel now. So let's see if we still have Daniel and Francesca here. If you guys are around, turn on your cameras, say hi to know that you're around. Awesome. Okay, and we have three more panelists. Let's start with Dr. Christian Watz. He is Scientific Associate at the Federal Office of Public Health. Christian, Dr. Watz, danke. We have Andrew Petronanos, founder of FineLeaf and consultant at Global Go Switzerland. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, hi.
Again. And last but not least, Peter Steger, chairman and board member of IG Medcan Swiss Society of Cannabis in Medicine You can tell us more later, Peter, but I assume this is like an industry association, and he is also the managing director of a company that has a name that is hard to pronounce, Spagyr, I think it is, Productions AG, and that company manufactures extracts for, I assume it's the leading pharmacy in Switzerland when it comes to medical cannabis sales, correct, Peter?
Yes, more or less, yeah.
Thank you. How do I pronounce the name of the company, the extraction company?
The pronunciation is Prohibited.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm here with two hats. The one is the association from the producers of medicine, cannabis medicine, and the other one is this association that's like kind of an umbrella organization for cannabis in Switzerland.
Good to know. And well, thank you all for being here. And let's start with the different questions to go deeper into the different topics. And yeah, so very happy about the approval of the changes that will definitely broaden access to medical cannabis in Switzerland. And we will talk about future challenges, but that is good news that particularly the special exceptional authorization that patients needed from the government to access to medical cannabis will not be needed any longer, and it will be up to the doctor, the final decision. But it looks like these changes, although they were approved in Parliament, in both houses of Parliament, are still not implemented. And Daniel, in your presentation, you mentioned fall next year. So my first question, and perhaps we can start with you, Dr. Vetz, is why next year? Why can't we implement this right away, right?
So the political process still takes some time. As you said, the final vote took place on March 19th, and now there is in Switzerland there is this referendum period, which runs until July 8th of this year, and after that the ordinance has to be developed and implemented, and that's of course also a process which needs some more time, and so we expect the change to get into effect in mid next year, so to fulfill the whole political process which is required.
Got it. And do we need more approvals from other parts of the government, or is now basically waiting and hope there's no problem with the referendum?
Well, I mean, the basic change has been approved. It's now about the specifics. I mean, yeah, which specifics will take place, and of course, these also need to be approved. You
mean secondary rules that are still needed?
Something like that. So the specifics, as I said, I mean, the law just gives the framework, and there is the ordinance, which basically, yeah, sets up the specific things to do.
And that will be up to the executive government to draft that?
After the referendum, and then, yeah, this process will take place.
Got it. So now opening that's the same question for everyone, but maybe broadening it a little bit more. We spoke about the good news of patients not needing that exceptional authorization anymore. But anyone, what would you say are other meaningful changes of these new rules?
I think what's interesting, and maybe the rest will talk a bit more about it, is the changes on products that will be available is probably a key thing, but also as Daniel mentioned in his presentation, it will, Switzerland is a complicated country when it comes to applying regulation. So we have what's called the cantons. Obviously, it's a bit like the US if you imagine the different states, so each one kind of makes their own rules. So the Federal Office of Public Health initiates what's going to happen, and then actually Swissmedic is the next authority, and then every canton authority will decide what will be allowed within each canton. So I think on the flower side, maybe from Peter or Daniel, you can mention a little bit more on other changes that will take place.
Peter and Daniel, before going to you, let me give a short review of what the situation today, and correct me if I am wrong, but today what patients have in Switzerland is Sativex, an authorized medicine like any other medicine. And if they want to access to, let's say, non-approved medical cannabis products, that's only as an extemporaneous mixture, magistral preparations, however that might be called. But, and this is an important point, patients have no access to legal flower today in Switzerland, correct? So it's only full spectrum extracts and dronabinol preparations. So tell me, will this change? Will patients be able to access to flower? And what about other more, let's say, sophisticated products, like, I don't know, let's say suppositories, for example?
Mr. Wirtz knows it better, but as we see, the flowers will be probably permitted as a medicine in the future. I think but Mr. Wirtz, I would be interested in your explanation. Probably the explanation behind is that, as Ms. Francesca Quadri said, we have around 3,000 permissions for patients and around 100,000 or 110,000, as Daniel said, patients that take cannabis on the illegal market, and they probably take flowers. So once you open up, you probably will give them, or you want to give them, the possibility to kind of continue with the medication they did before illegally. But maybe that's my assumption. Because our association, not the producer association, the association with the doctors, the scientists, we are not too happy about it, because we see actually advantages in having proceeded products and not only flowers to smoke. There are advantages with products you can dose easily and so on. But now I give the question back to Mr. Wirtz. What were the ideas behind opening it up for the flowers?
Well, the ideas were we are not physicians, and we wanted to leave the decision to physicians who actually can judge what kind of products a patient actually needs. As you said, different symptoms require different onset, for example, of the effects, and we, or the Federal Office of Public Health, are not the ones to decide on a medical point of view what a patient really needs. So the law sets a framework which is open in regards to what the patients receive, but it's still the physician who decides what to prescribe. And as you said, also it's also a decision by the cantons made if they want to set up some restrictions, or if they want to leave that as open as possible as well. So it's one of the purposes of the law change to give the responsibility to the physician. And if the law makes some restrictions, it's against the whole sense of the law change, I would say.
I'm very pleased to hear that. Daniel, before going to you, Francisca, are you pleased with this approach from the government of leaving the decision up to the doctors? Do you think that is good news for patients?
Not really, because in the moment, the biggest problem for the patient is to find a doctor who helps with the prescription. And we just see that the doctor don't have any idea about cannabis as a medicament. So it's important that they get educated very fast and very properly, that they are able to prescribe it right. And yeah, to say it's for all the patients, I mean, 100,000 patients, they know what they are doing. And the problem is that we don't have an access to proper medicaments. So we have to deal with what we get. So most of the patients need to buy flowers on the black market. That's not what we want. We want to have clean products. And I think many patients would like to have extracts and not flowers. But there are some patients that really need the flowers. Especially in my case, I needed the intake over the lungs because it's much better for my spasticity. So for me, it's important to have. And for me, it's important to have a variety of different cannabis strains in different form of intake. That's very important. And if we don't get it like this, the 100,000 patients will not accept this law. And yeah.
So would you say the new bottleneck will be doctors' education now?
The doctors are the bottleneck, yeah.
Okay, well, but at least you have one less bottleneck now. So the special authorization is not needed anymore, and there's no restriction when it comes to flower.
Yes, and we are very happy about the law, because for us it's a confirmation that it's okay what we are doing, and they tell us cannabis is useful as a medicine, so we are happy about the law, so don't understand me wrong.
Got it. Francisca, a question, perhaps you know the answer. Do you have an estimate of, let's say, those 100,000 patients that are estimated to have access, not necessarily to legal products in Switzerland, but that benefit from medical cannabis products? Do you know how many use predominantly flower and how many use other types of products? I would assume that because most use products from the black market, it's mostly flower, right?
Yes, most of them use flowers, and because we don't have any other things. We
It's what they
started
can
to
find.
grow by ourselves. We started to do our products, so our extracts by ourselves. So, but most of the people don't know it, and they just use the flowers because they don't know it better.
And to be clear, in terms of home growing, nothing changed, right? It's still illegal for
It's
patients
still
to grow.
illegal. Everything you do, it's illegal.
Daniel, let's go to you. Feel free to choose one of the previous questions. Otherwise, we can go with what do you expect are the most meaningful changes now coming?
No, I think the flexibility that patients could potentially get access to in terms of the product range and so on is definitely one of the more important changes. Of course, easier access. We mentioned this earlier, but but just mind you, it can still be that the cantonal authorities, for some reason, and I don't know how the process goes exactly within the government right now, could restrict certain forms of delivery. So for example, they could say in our canton, for whatever reason, stigma or something else, we're not going to accept to disperse flour, for example. And while we know that certain mature markets offer a more broad range of products and that flour typically goes a bit down, but still remains a very big pillar of consumption, it still is an important factor.
In that case, Daniel, I know it's not the ideal situation, but could a patient get a prescription in one canton for flour and go buy it into another canton, the pharmacy in another canton?
Well, I'm not sure about that. That remains to be seen in the ordinance.
Okay. I think
Let's try not to speculate then.
How it works at the moment, and just jumping in, I mean, a doctor writes a prescription for a specific product that will be picked up at a specific pharmacy.
Okay. So let's talk then about the types of products and the opportunities for production in Switzerland, and maybe we start with you, Peter. Correct me if I am wrong, but as far as I understand, the legal medical market today works. I'm talking about magistral preparations here, so not Sativex. The way that it works is that a doctor prescribes an individualized prescription for a patient. The patients go to the pharmacy where the product is preparated for the patient individually, and the pharmacy sources the extract from only one producer, which in turn sources the plant material from only one grower, right? And it's predominantly one pharmacy that has the majority of the patients in Switzerland. Am I correct so far?
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's a relatively closed system of, let's say, one grower to one extractor to one pharmacy, and that's it. I assume this will change too, right? Because today we have a couple thousand patients. If we expect to have many more in the future, we will need more production in Switzerland to supply that market. So how will it change?
Well, as you said, there is no special certificate the doctor needs. So every doctor can prescribe, which is different than in other countries where you need some kind of education you can show. So at the moment, I think there were around 1,200, 1,300 doctors that I know that prescribed already cannabis medicine, and around 400 to 500 are regularly making prescriptions. So at the moment, everything kind of lands at this one or two pharmacy stores. But in the future, of course, it's open, and it's of course very open where you go with your prescription.
But it will continue to be a magistral preparation, right?
Yeah, I speak about magistral preparations. And as you see in Germany, you don't really have to look into the future. You can look into Germany. I mean, for a pharmacy store, it makes sense if you have a certain amount of prescriptions coming in. And of course, then when the variety, and I actually am pro the variety, but you have to look. I mean, every time you have to organize it then. So you got some kind of strain you need, and then you have to organize it. And but it probably, the market will make its way, and it will be open for imports. But I think what will change is, or what I completely agree, it's very, very important, the education of the doctors, because it all starts with mostly starts with the doctors, sometimes with the patients actually, that come with ideas. But I know that the doctors I know in my association, also my wife, which is a doctor, now they are used to having prescriptions or making prescriptions for proceed products. So they're a bit reluctant now to the idea all of a sudden to prescribe flowers where they don't know exactly how to do it. But I agree with Mr. Wertz and also with Francisca, what you said, that sometimes the effect must be faster. So the intake with smoking is better, I agree. So we have to find ways there that it's, for the doctors, still like medicine. And you saw that in Germany, pharmacy stores and also doctors, they sometimes are reluctant to this idea of having flowers prescribed. I hope we find a good way there, not to give munition, is that the word, munition, for the ones that are actually completely against opening up the whole thing. So that they say, look, it only served to make the illegal market legal. So
the solution that was found in Germany was to say that the flower is not prescribed for smoking. It could be prescribed for vaporizing, and there are 2 medical devices authorized for that may even be reimbursed by insurance in the case of Germany, or for tea preparation. But let's stay on the production opportunities. So let's say I want to grow or to extract cannabis in Switzerland next year or 2 years from now. Is that a possibility, or do I need to have like a pharmacy contract, a contract with a pharmacy to justify that all my production will go to that pharmacy? Is that changing? Maybe Andrew, Daniel, can you give us a little bit more context about that?
Well, you will not require to have a contract beforehand with the pharmacy, because and therein lies also one of the bigger opportunities, because you're not just potentially catering to the Swiss market, you're also catering potentially to the export markets. And this is where I see players already now in the market interested to find a market entry, to see how they can position themselves to deliver really high quality all kinds of products out of Switzerland with a Swiss, made badge. So yeah, there is an opportunity.
And what about the requirements to, let's say, obtain a cultivation or extraction license? Do we need more rules for that, or are the rules already there? And can I go tomorrow and apply for a license? And maybe Dr. Wertz, feel free to intervene if you would like.
Well, today it's like was described before. You need to prove demand from a physician or a patient, and then they have to prove that the pharmacy is able to produce all the preparations, and the cultivation also needs to be set up like in the whole way. Circuit, it's a closed circuit, exactly. It's depending on each other. And if someone wants to grow or cultivate cannabis for medical purposes currently, you need to apply for an exceptional permit, which they can receive from the Federal Office of Public Health, but only for a certain amount, which actually is related to the demand of the patient and the physicians. And once the change is in effect, it will be all enhanced Swissmedic, and all those specifics will be developed and worked on until then. So I cannot comment more on that, because simply everything hasn't been specified yet. Certainly, you need a certain kind of approval.
Got it.
I think, Alfredo, the answer is also now then in the future, it will be in a system that already functions. So it doesn't actually need additional, I think, regulations, I believe, my opinion. But you have to keep in mind that most of the things that will happen in the near future is magister preparations. And those have some specialties, of course. In every country is looked upon those preparations differently. So you have to understand the Swiss kind of situation that already exists.
Maybe here, just one point on the cultivation part, as opposed to the recreational trials, when it comes to medicinal cannabis, indoor production is also fine. So it doesn't have to be biological production with direct access to the ground.
I understand. And I assume that there are certain quality standards required. And there's a question from the audience already about GMP. That may not be required for the recreational experiment, correct? And also perhaps important to note, because it's not the case in other jurisdictions, particularly in North America, that these are two completely separate things, right, Dr. Vetz? The recreational experiment and the medical.
Those are purposely completely separated things, and requirements are a bit different. Of course, as you were discussing last week, I mean, the quality levels are set very high for the recreational pilot trials, almost GMP standards. But of course, if it's medical cannabis, GMP standards have to be fulfilled.
Yeah. But it's important to know that it's not like in some North American jurisdictions where companies produce and then decide, do I want to sell this in the medical or in the recreational market?
No.
Completely separate.
Yep.
Yeah. That's important.
I think
go ahead, Andrew.
What's interesting, Alfredo, is going back to one of your questions also of what are the main changes. I think the main changes in terms of what's changing the product, but one of the main changes is the export. So the commercial side of this is changing.
Okay,
whereas
Andrew, let me do a poll before you continue, a poll for the panel. In the next couple of years, do you think Switzerland will be a net importer or a net exporter of medical cannabis? Let's say 3 years from now, 2025, if you want.
Very, very good question. I think if you look at I think exporter will be a big thing, and that's what a lot of companies are looking for. And the
not your wish, what you expect.
My expectation is actually Switzerland will probably be an importer when it comes to medical cannabis. And the reason for that is we have to think of the patients, right? And I think that the difference is Switzerland tends to be very expensive when you're manufacturing things. So I think the Swiss quality and the Swiss name for medical cannabis reaching outside markets, but the internal market, the biggest issue, and we'll probably touch on that in a minute, is the main thing we try to focus on in the patient is to cut down the black market, but also to figure out a way on getting health insurances to support the patients and their medication. And if we don't have that, then patients will always go back to the black market. And this is where I think going to your question, I think import in terms of medical cannabis will be quite high in Switzerland rather than the local market. So,
anyone else want to answer this question?
Well, we hope as the Association of the Producers that we will be net exporters, but I believe it depends on the innovative force in Switzerland of the producers to make effective productions that make a good price, And in Switzerland, it's not so easy sometimes because we are in a small country. So cultivation, if you think on it, it's probably a bit more expensive than other places. But I think it's possible that we use our brain to make good and affordable products, and then we'll have a chance to be net exporters. Sorry, I said it wrong. I believe we probably are net importers, but when we do our stuff right, maybe we have a chance.
Yeah, in my experience, and I'm not talking about Switzerland in particular here, but just in my experience with several countries legalizing medical cannabis or broadening the rules, they all expect to be net exporters, but at the end of the day, it takes quite a lot of time to be a net exporter, and it takes more than it's usually planned to have locally produced products of quality, and it will probably be challenging to be a net exporter in the next couple of years, and let's see what happens. Francesca, let's go back to you. You mentioned a couple of challenges already, including doctors' willingness to prescribe and the need for education. And Peter just mentioned something interesting, which is price. Let's assume that price goes down because products are imported from other jurisdictions, production ramps up in Switzerland. Do you think that would be a great thing for patients, or do you think that even if price goes down, the real battle for patients, let's say, is to get insurance to pay for it? And is there a chance to get insurers to pay for it within the next few years, or what do you think about that?
That's difficult to answer. Yeah, I think it will be very difficult for the patient if the insurance doesn't help with the prices. They are sick people, they don't have money for paying their own medicaments. yeah, when I look at myself, the only thing that really is payable for me is when I grow it by myself. That's how it is. And I have quite high dosages I need. So yeah, that makes it more expensive. But of course, it would be great if I have different options. I can't wait to get affordable medicaments from the pharmacy. It would be great. But at the end, it's a question of the money you have as a patient. And I think it's the problem that we can get the rich people can pay and the poor people cannot. And that's my fear for the future.
Anyone else about insurance or price? Otherwise, I have a question for Dr. Vets.
Maybe just shortly, because this is like my main thing I have to do for the umbrella organization, and I think it has to be very important to bring the medical officers in the insurance companies to accept that with the magistral preparations, where we have a lack of the efficacy on the efficacy side, we have to implement or show them the guidelines that we are working on, that they accept, like kind of that they have something they can look upon when they get prescriptions to decide whether to reimburse or not, and to help them overcome this efficacy problem they have. And then we have to be cost effective, and then we can look to Germany, where we have quite a high percentage, as you know very well, although nothing like it doesn't work on the whole level, but we have to look on it. 3 years ago, I got a letter from the Association of the Insurance Companies, and it was not looking good. They're not interested on larger scale cannabis medicine in Switzerland to reimburse even what they reimburse now percentage. At the moment, it's about 30%. So it will be quite an important fight, and I hope we have good arguments.
Dr. Vats, connected with that, and by the way, to anyone listening to the webinar, we are going to have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience, so feel free to start sending those. Dr. Vats, connected with insurance reimbursement and perhaps evidence, there will be some data gathering from the government, correct? Maybe something comparable to what the German government is also doing. Maybe can you guide us through that? Tell us why is that being done and how that data will be used?
Well, the data collection will be implemented, first of all, to have an overview of the development following to the change. How does physicians actually adopt the law change? Do prescriptions rise, and how do they prescribe? What kind of preparations will be prescribed, and most of all, also which kind of symptoms and indications will be treated with medical cannabis? Of course, it's difficult to have on one side more information is better, and of course we are also interested in having more information. But on the other side, of course, it's mandatory to keep the whole process low scale as possible to not make everything more complicated than it has been before. I mean, of course, the whole law change it's meant to make things more simple and not more complicated. So if the process of collecting the data would take more time than actually sending in an application for an exceptional permit, that would make no sense. So that's one point. And on the other hand, also trying to help physicians to get an insight on how peer physicians treat symptoms and indications, and also to encourage physicians to treat patients with different symptoms with cannabis medication.
Anyone else would like to say something about this data collection effort?
I think what's important always to look at when we're talking about medical cannabis is, again, how can we prove to the people that are going to be supporting the patients that their health or their life is getting better? And this is where, of course, clinical data will be important whether it's a magistral formulation. That magistral formulation is a special, let's say, formulation for epilepsy, or a special formulation for MS patients or chronic pain, where we can get maybe then Swissmedic and prove to Swissmedic there's sufficient data to kind of make a market authorization for one of these magistral processes. And then also the data is very important for the health insurances, because I think if you prove to anyone that your life is getting better, then you should be reimbursing. I think the biggest issue will always be, what is other pharmaceutical companies saying against, them losing out on their P&L.
And about that, we have a comment from Anna Mantova in the audience speaking about what cannabis is actually substituting, right? So as Francesca was saying, she now doesn't need a bunch of medicines thanks to using medical cannabis. So at the end of the day, it could even be cost saving for insurers.
Can I say something to that? I mean, it's go even further. A few years ago, I have been in hospital several times because of pneumonia, thrombosis, embolia, and I saved so much money, and I haven't been in the hospital for more than 3 years now. So if you count like this, is it a very good option?
And inspiring to do that. We have a very interesting question from an anonymous attendee. And to give a little bit of context, we said very clearly that in Switzerland, we have the recreational experiment, which is completely separate from the medical cannabis framework. And let's say there's a third part of the cannabis industry in Switzerland, and also very well known, which is the non-medical CBD industry, correct? Switzerland is one of the, I would say, best countries in Europe when it comes to the regulation for non-medical CBD, which is freely sold as long as it has less than 1% THC. You correct me if I'm wrong with something of this. And here someone is asking, what will happen with all these CBD companies that are in Switzerland? I assume that they will not be allowed to automatically sell their products in the medical markets because that's not how they are regulated. But what about export to other countries? Maybe someone can answer that question. Could these companies that in Switzerland produce non-medical CBD export their CBD as a medicinal product to other countries?
That's
possible.
basically, sorry, Andrew. That really depends on
No, go ahead.
the regulations in the receiving country. And in Switzerland, as you know, THC content can go up to 1%. So in the European Union, obviously the products that are exported have to be produced in a way that THC does not exceed 0.2%. And if this is observed, it could be exported as a chemical product, for example, for further processing, and as an isolate or as a or full hemp extract, for example. But it has obviously to really abide by the whole set of rules that apply, cosmetics law, foodstuff law, and so on. It's quite involved.
Right.
And I think if it's medical, it has to be GMP produced, and there's very few, let's say, CBD companies that have a CBD brand that are actually producing under GMP. It'll fall under the same rules that apply for THC cannabis in any market. So if you do want to basically sell your product as a medicinal cannabis, it should fall under that compliance rules.
One last comment, and also coming from the audience, somebody is speaking about brands, and I assume that in going back to the strictly medical market, this will continue to be quite restrictive, right, in terms of how producing companies can or actually cannot communicate with patients and advertise their products, correct?
We believe that's correct. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so let's call Paul back. Paul, are you around? And if anyone has a final comment to do, please go ahead.
That was great. I'll just say that. There's my final comment. That was incredibly detailed. It's just interesting to me the way that the regulator treats cannabis like it's radioactive or plutonium, and we get hung up on these THC contents. And I can count on 0 fingers the amount of people that have really had an adverse reaction to cannabis that could threaten their physical health in a meaningful way. We know that there's no known toxicity dose, so it's virtually impossible to, if you will, quote unquote, overdose. We know it doesn't contraindicate with other medications. And more importantly, we have like anecdotal evidence. And let's be clear that, you know, physicians do rely upon their eyes and their ears to learn. And like a lot of treatments, for example, mental health, you can't measure the effectiveness of, say, a pharmaceutical mental health medication on a blood test. You need the patient to tell you, my depression is relieved, or my pain. You can't measure pain on a blood test. So when someone like Francesca explains that her own pain, her own spasticity is being effectively treated by cannabis therapies, that should be a wholly blank moment for the regulator. Francesca clearly has no agenda here other than speaking truthfully about what cannabis has done for her. And I think that it's frustrating for those of us on the inside of this industry to see the government taking such half steps all the way. I applaud Switzerland for showing real leadership across Europe, not only by making it easier for physicians to prescribe, but also by experimenting with adult use cannabis. This is the type of leadership we're going to need. This is a classic private-public sort of tie-up where we, as private entrepreneurs or advocates, need the government to do their role. And so I'm encouraged, but also somewhat discouraged by this sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach. And it's going to take a tremendous amount of advocacy to get the regulators to where we who are in the industry are all at, which is that there's nothing to be afraid of here. There's only wins for society, wins for patients, wins for advocates. So I'm really thinking that even webinars like today are part of the process towards normalizing and socializing cannabis as a medicine first and foremost. So thank you to everybody for their incredibly valuable insight today. I do want to thank our sponsors, without which today would not be possible. Fine Leaf Consultants, Andrew Patronasis, who's our close friend and colleague at Global Go, Fast Forward Innovation, Zuber Lawler, Medcan, and Froria. Thanks to everybody. Just another reminder to support Medcan. I'm sure if you enjoyed today, you'll understand the paramount role Medcan has towards creating a more accessible platform for patients in need to access medical cannabis. So Francesca, sincere thanks for what you've done, taking your your situation and turning it into a platform to help other people. That's all we could ask for anybody on this planet. Thank you so much to everybody. Until next time, I believe our next webinar is going to be focusing on Mexico, another emerging cannabis jurisdiction. I encourage everybody that enjoyed today or any of our other programs to please look for the email indicating when our webinar focusing on what's happening in Mexico. Certainly, Alfredo, you're awfully familiar, as I am, on the on-again, off-again nature of Mexico, but this is going to be another significant domino in the cannabis ecosystem to fall. So we're looking forward to unpacking that. Until then, it's Paul Rosen. Thanks so much to everybody for their participation, and thank you mostly to our content providers.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.